Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert had arguably the worst game of his career in round one. We'll tell you if that will impact his dynasty value next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the postseason with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, no matter if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we are breaking down the wild card playoffs. Not a lot of competitive games. We did have one later in the day, but I want to start, Kate, with the first game that we saw, Chargers at the Texans. The Chargers were actually 3-point favorites over on FanDuel, and they lose by 20 to Houston. Justin Herbert, 14 of 32 for 242 yards, one touchdown, 4 interceptions. Almost all of his passing yards came late in the fourth quarter. This is a bad game by Justin Herbert. Do you think this is going to impact his dynasty value at all?
I think it might, but only because I think, generally speaking, the question marks around Justin Herbert in a Greg Roman offense, is there enough passing volume, etc. There were a lot of kind of question marks coming into the season. So I think when you come into a season with kind of this preconceived notion and then you cap it off with what was literally a career low completion percentage for Justin Herbert, completed just 43.8% of passes, 4 interceptions, Marcus. Like, that leaves a bad taste in your mouth. That is the first time in his career he has had more than 2 interceptions in a single game. 40.9 NFL passer rating, just over 5 fantasy points. That tells you everything you need to know. But I do think that I'm still not out on Justin Herbert. I've talked about this a lot throughout this season, where I want players tied to this Los Angeles Chargers ecosystem. I'm a big believer in Justin Herbert, the quarterback. Obviously, this game did not go as planned. Texans defense, I do think, has generally been underrated by public perception. And I don't think there was any doubt in my mind that, the Texans secondary is capable of forcing, turnovers at a high rate. I do think there's a lot to like still about the Chargers, though.
I'm glad that you gave the Texans credit because their defense was awesome. D'Amico Ryans had an awesome game plan. Will Anderson had, I think, 1.5 sacks in this game. Danielle Hunter was whooping butt all game long. Like, they played a really good game. I wouldn't be surprised if you're right, Kate, that this game, because it's a national TV game in prime time, that if it does lower Justin Herbert's dynasty value. However, I wouldn't be surprised if this game ultimately helped Justin Herbert in the long run, because one of the things that you saw in this game, it was very obvious, is they had one reliable pass catcher. We'll get to Ladd McConkey in a second, 9 for 197 and a touchdown. The next leading receiver on their team, Kate, was Will Dissly, 2 for 16 on 5 targets. And Will Dissly had a big play early in the game on a 3rd and 19 down in field goal range where Herbert evaded some pressure. He got hit as he was throwing the ball and threw a dime to Will Dissly, who dropped it. Will Dissly also had a play later in the game where Herbert threw the ball on an out route and it clunked right off his hands into the arms of a defensive back. I think the Chargers know they have to get better at the pass catcher spot this offseason. I think they will. I think they're going to be aggressive in finding another option at receiver. And I do think that's going to help.
I think that's going to help big time. And I do think seeing this kind of colossal failure on everybody else's part outside of Ladd McConkey, that should inspire this organization to get him some help, some much, much, much needed help here. Now, let's talk about Ladd McConkey, though. Let's flip the script because, for as bad as Herbert's struggles were in this game, I mean, the only thing that kept him even looking like an NFL quarterback in this game was Ladd McConkey. And obviously, like, the stat line speaks for itself. Anytime you come together for, I don't know, what's the math work out to? Like 2/3 of Justin Herbert's passing then, like, it's a big day, right? And Ladd McConkey, a prospect we really liked, had some concerns from like a health standpoint, but I don't think there's any question mark that Ladd McConkey has just about infinite upside. The question is, like, do you maintain that upside if we're adding in another top end pass catcher for Justin Herbert? Like, does that give you any pause? Because if we're saying, this bad game for Justin Herbert's, it's bad, but they'll probably get him a weapon. What does that do for Ladd McConkey?
Nothing, because I think Ladd McConkey is just going to continue to get all of these middle of the field targets. I think what they really need, Kate, is somebody that can win on the outside, somebody that can win vertically. It's just not Quentin Johnston as much. We talked about this last week with Quentin Johnston. I still am buying into him a little bit on the outside, but you can see, like, in high leverage situations, it's just not there. Like, the consistency just isn't there at all. I guess I'm just not all that worried about. I'm not all that worried about Ladd. Do you know, Kate, over his last 8 games, including the playoffs, do you want to know how many receiving yards he averaged per game? Go ahead and take a guess.
I know it's high. 80?
106.
Woo-hoo-hoo.
106. This reminds me a little bit of like the Puka Nacua thing last year, where it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen once they have a healthy Cooper Kupp? I just think that Ladd McConkey is a perfect fit with Justin Herbert, and he's always going to be the guy that gets these middle of the field targets, and I think he's always going to be highly effective and efficient. So I fully expect him to add a weapon in the offseason. I just don't care when it comes to Ladd.
I think that's fair. And maybe, if they get somebody that is more of the outside threat as opposed to being a guy who works over the middle more often, like, the diversification of those roles might mean there's just enough to go around. And we know that Justin Herbert, when he's at his peak, not when he's throwing 4 interceptions, but when he's at his peak, he is a guy that I think can very easily sustain two receiving weapons at a high end. In the month of December, Ladd McConkey, you mentioned the hot end of the season he had. The second half was ridiculous. He is currently wide receiver 12 on Dynasty League football.
Could be higher than that.
Could be higher than that. Honestly, it's kind of crazy.
Give me some of the names. Give me some of the names that are ahead of him right
now. This one's an interesting one. Brock Bowers, tight end.
I'd rather have Bowers.
I would as well. How about Devin Achane, RB4, being drafted ahead of Ladd McConkey? I'm taking McConkey there.
I'm taking McConkey there. And partly that's just the way that we build our fantasy teams. We would rather have the wide receivers, right? But that one's close. I would lead Ladd there as well.
How about wide receiver Garrett Wilson, who
Ladd. And listen,
Ladd?
I know our guy Matt Williamson loves Garrett Wilson. I do too. The talent, I think Garrett Wilson is a more talented quarterback. Sorry, a receiver, or more talented receiver. But Ladd just produces, and he's attached to a awesome quarterback. Just give me Ladd.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair thing. And we also kind of know, like I said, we know the ecosystem that the Chargers are going to produce. We know the quarterback situation. We know we could reasonably project what the Chargers are going to look like moving forward. We have no idea if the Jets are going to figure it out. We don't know if Garrett's going to be a Jet here in the year to come. Like, we don't know anything about Garrett Wilson and what to expect from his overall ecosystem. And I think that that's a great tiebreaker for trying to project these guys moving forward, because I like that safety. And I also think that, this wild card game here was the perfect example of the kind of upside he had. I mean, he was the only true passing threat that was on this field, right? Like,
Right.
and he still walked away with insane production, almost 200 receiving yards. I think just the skill set, his ability to separate against single coverage, like he can do so many big things that I think just make it really hard, even for an underrated defense like the
Yep.
Houston Texans to come to a full stop.
Let's talk about the Packers receivers, which, I mean, they laid an egg again this week against the Eagles. Let's talk about their dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you find the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself, and I can tell you that it's an absolute game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Small businesses are wearing so many different hats right now. LinkedIn gets that. They understand that every hire is so crucial. They'll connect you with the best candidates using data that you're not going to be able to find anywhere else. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action, and that's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or just want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Here is a special offer for Locked On Dynasty football listeners. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Okay, let's move over to this Packer-Eagle game. Packers offense does almost nothing in this game. 10 points. They don't score their first touchdown until late into the fourth quarter. The receivers were a mess again. No Christian Watson, who is out for the year with a knee injury. Jaden Reed goes 4 for 46. Dontavian Wicks 2 for 39. Romeo Doubs 2 for 13 before leaving the game with an injury. What do we do with these Packers pass catchers?
Is it a bold take to say absolutely nothing? I don't know what we can realistically expect from this Packers receiving core. I know, like, when we're looking at depth, right? This Green Bay receiving core is one of the best in the league. It's not often that you can look at, a player's wide receiver forward like Dontavian Wicks with as much upside as I do think Wicks has, but it's making the routine plays that I think, we need to see from the offense that you maybe can't rely on as much when you don't have a top tier receiving weapon. Now, I'm still kind of confused about Jaden Reed, where his absence kind of came from, because you watch the tape in the first half of the season, there's a very good reason why they were making an effort to get him the ball. We saw in the back half of the 2023 season, his rookie year, and yet he's kind of just been eliminated from the game plan in general. Like
31 receiving yards per game over the last 9 games.
And it baffles me because I think we know the ceiling is much higher. We've seen him work into, like the general lineup. It was last year just the case that he only worked out of the slot mainly, but I feel like he's capable of more. It's just a matter of did he fall out of favor with Matt LaFleur? Because it's not like I think we saw a bunch of mistakes and that's relegated him to a backseat role. I'm still kind of confused about Jayden Reed, but it doesn't seem like LaFleur is. So I think we have to ignore this passing attack, generally speaking, and maybe the answer to our dynasty hopes and dreams is something closer to a Tucker Kraft than it is one of these wide receivers.
I do think the Packers are going to have to do some soul searching this offseason because the offense was better overall. Like if you look at the numbers this year compared to last year, the numbers were better. The problem was that they just couldn't beat any of the good teams that they played. Go look at their schedule. Like they lost to every good team they played. They should have lost to the Bears twice. They barely beat them the first time around. They lost to them the second time, lost to the Vikings both games, lost to the Lions both games, lost to the Eagles twice now. They just weren't able to compete with the higher end teams in the conference. And I think the idea of a wide receiver by committee is great in theory. But Kate, when you get to 3rd and 9, you got to have somebody that you know is going to get open. And you can't just always scheme these guys to get open. I think the answer would have been Christian Watson if he were able to stay healthy, but he can't stay healthy. And now he's going to be dealing with a major knee injury going into the last year of his contract. Like I would have to assume that we're not going to see him at all next year. I think the Packers are a team that could be in play for a receiver like early in the draft, or maybe they're like a sneaky team to go out and try to trade for Garrett Wilson or sign a T. Higgins. I think they know they have to get better at that spot.
Well, and I think it's kind of like going back to the point, it almost reminds me of kind of what we saw out of the Steelers, right? Like you can't win against some of these top tier NFL offenses by being conservative. And I think what we saw from the Packers this year, they want to run the ball. They want to get Josh Jacobs involved. Like they want to play possession football,
which isn't a bad idea, but you've got to be able to throw the ball as well. And it wasn't good enough against the good teams.
Exactly. And I think that's more of the time where you see that wide receiver by committee maybe doesn't work, right? Is against these really good offenses or against these really good teams with really good offenses that are going to put you in to the point. They're going to back you into a corner and say, you have to put points on the board. You can't just possess the football and march down the field. Like their defenses are too good. Their offenses are too good. They're forcing you to do something that maybe your offense isn't inherently built to overcome. And I think that's what we saw was missing with that wide receiver one. They didn't have a guy that they could go to on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, and just know that, like, I'm going to throw the ball up. You're going to get it. I think even Christian Watson, like, I think we saw him take strides this year, but I still don't think he ever became the consistency guy. They need a consistency guy, and they need, a contested catch dude that can just go up. I think T. Higgins would be such an interesting addition for this offense. It seems like he's staying with the Cincinnati Bengals, but like they need a big bodied dude that they can just toss it up. Maybe allow Jayden Reed to be more of a finesse type player, can work out of the slot, can do some things on the inside, but like your main outside guy, I think needs to have a little bit more power, a little bit more juice than what they have right now, and it showed.
Let's talk about Jordan Love's dynasty value real quick, because he was one of the biggest risers last year after, I believe, having tied for the lead in touchdown passes, 32 in 2023, 25 in 2024. Now, he did miss 2 games. Need to point that out. But one of our concerns about Jordan Love is that when you're not a runner, you have to have volume. And last year we saw him have 250 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. As a runner this year, 83 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. Where do we stand on Jordan Love as the dynasty asset?
I mean, I think you have to have cooled because, again, I think we kind of saw the type of football that Matt LaFleur wants to play. I think he wants to take the air out of the football a little bit, let Jordan Love make some big plays when he needs to. But it seemed like the goal this year was to not put him in positions where he has to necessarily be like the hero. I'm going to read you Jordan Love's fantasy finishes here from week 8 onward. QB 32, QB 35, QB 11, 17, 13, 16, 13, 25, 24, 36. And that was through the fantasy football playoffs. Jordan Love was not a difference maker in your fantasy run. And maybe that changes if they get him a bona fide wide receiver one. But if we're maintaining this wide receiver by committee, I don't think the ceiling is high enough to justify maybe the floor that we're going to see if they just want to run the crap out of the ball and not put him in some of these high risk situations. Like,
he feels like a mid-range QB2 for me going forward.
I think that's fair. And again, maybe if they change this offensive philosophy, I just think we've seen that, like, it feels like this year, the way that they orchestrated their offense was what they want to accomplish. And I think if that's the case, maybe they want to do it a little bit better. Maybe they want to, execute a little bit better. But I still think they want to follow this general blueprint moving forward. And yeah, Jordan Love, he might have some really big, efficient games that, yeah, he had 2 top 5 finishes at the quarterback position this year. But we saw the floor in games where maybe they want to take the ball out of his hands a little bit. It's quite low.
Let's talk about James Cook, because on Friday's show, Kate, we talked about some players that had the most to gain in round 1 of the playoffs. I don't think James Cook disappointed. Let's talk about his dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That is $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. We've got a game tonight between the Vikings and the Rams, which should be a lot of fun. But I'm already looking ahead, Kate, to the divisional round. And man, we've got some awesome games, including the Bills and Ravens. All of those lines are available right now. Go check out the odds and go place a bet on your favorite team. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Kate, let's do some miscellaneous items from the weekend. And let's start with James Cook, who we were really excited to see in this matchup against Denver's defense. 23 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. I mean, he was phenomenal in this game. I thought he was maybe the best player in the field outside of Josh Allen.
Yeah, and what I love to see about James Cook this year is it just feels like he looks like a different player. He's still an explosive dude. There's obviously that element to his game, but seeing him be able to execute some more of the in-between the tackle stuff, I think just continues to impress me more and more. He is an undersized running back, but I don't feel like he looks undersized anymore when he's on the football field. Like, he's running tough. He's gaining yards after contact. He's still really explosive. I feel like he's really rounded out his style of game. He's not like, I thought of him as more of like the one trick pony. Yes, he's got juice. What does he offer when speed's not enough? I think he's answered those questions wholeheartubly for me. And I'm looking at like the rankings. I've been very tough, obviously, on the mid-range or low-end Q or RB1s. Like, I feel like it's kind of RB is top heavy, and then I really want nothing after that. Like, yeah, I'll take my Jahmyr Gibbs, my Bijan, but after that, in the back half of the RB1 ranks, Devin Achane, Kenneth Walker, Chase Brown, I think there's a ton of big questions to be had there. But when I'm looking at James Cook, I want James Cook over all of those guys that I just mentioned. Yep. And he's being valued right now as RB11 based on Dynasty League Football ADP for the month of December.
Buffalo's offensive line was just crushing Denver. And Denver had some really good players on the defensive line, including Zach Allen, Nick Benito, Jonathan Cooper, and they were just caving them in. So I think James Cook, He has 1 year left on his deal. He'll be a free agent in 2026. I think the Bills would be wise to keep him. He looked awesome. Just a couple other takeaways, at least that I had from the weekend, Kate. Isaiah Likely was the leading receiver for the Ravens. No Zay Flowers in this game, but 3 catches for 53 yards. He had the most targets in this offense. I know he's still blocked by Mark Andrews, who didn't have a great game, but Andrews was much, much better in the second half of the year. Isaiah Likely is just an awesome player, and I hope that we get to see him as a full-time starting tight end, featured tight end in this offense at some point during Lamar Jackson's prime.
And here's the thing. I don't even think you necessarily need to take Mark Andrews off the field. I think this is a system that obviously we can see them put 2 tight ends out on the field at the same time at any given moment. They're different enough that I think both of them can excel, like put both of them on the field, and going to be really hard for opposing defenses to come up with an answer there. I like Isaiah Likely in terms of his standalone value, because I think the fact that you take away wide receiver 1 in this offense and it's Isaiah Likely, who's the next man up, that tells you in a big way, I think, what a testament it is to his skills as a receiver and their trust in him to be the guy to step up. Like, I think this offense loves him. I think that they're going to need to go back to the drawing board this offseason and say, how do we get him more involved on an every down basis versus a only when we need him player? Because I think he's too good to only be utilized by necessity, right? I want him to touch the football far more often. And I have to imagine that the Ravens are going to be considering that moving forward.
Any other takeaways from the weekend that you wanted to get out there?
I love Bucky Irving. I just said I'm really critical of some of these lower end RB1s. I love watching Bucky Irving play football, man. I love the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ecosystem. I think Baker Mayfield, the real deal. Liam Cohen, I don't know. I want any Buccaneer. Give me all of the Buccaneers. Jaden Daniels.
Well, that was going to be mine. Here's the question I have for you. If somebody in a startup draft had the number 1 overall pick, assuming it's a super flex draft, would you crush them if they took Jaden Daniels at number 1?
No. I think, again, you can talk about Josh Allen, and obviously we already know the argument for Josh Allen number 1. In the dynasty realm, I think the argument that you're going to make is that, his ceiling as a passer is high. His ceiling as a runner is high, and you get the youth factor. Now, on the other flip side of it, we saw him get knocked around a little bit. And I don't know if you remember, Marcus, in the pre-draft process, we called him Johnny Knoxville because, he's got a slighter frame and he can get knocked around.
There was a play this game where he just got completely airlifted on a shot
out of bounds. I thought he was going to fly into the stands. I
know,
but I think we just know that the ceiling, both from a passing standpoint, I think he's the real deal. Man, this whole game honestly was just, I feel like a dynasty bonanza. It was such a fun game because I want players attached to both quarterbacks. I want players attached to both play callers. If neither of these OCs get head coaching gigs, I think, fantasy managers are going to be really happy if they have any players attached to either of these two teams. It was a really fun weekend of wildcard football.
All right. It's not over though yet. We still have a game tonight. And I can't wait to watch Vikings Rams. So make sure you tune in to tomorrow's show. We'll be breaking down that game from both the Vikings and the Rams perspective. Go download the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Modjuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy Monday Night Football playoff edition. We'll see you right back here on Tuesday.